Most of the time, we don't think about how extraordinary this system is. It works quietly in the background while we talk, walk, think, or sleep. Your heart beats around 100,000 times every day, pushing blood through arteries and veins so that oxygen and nutrients can reach every cell. Your brain sends electrical signals through billions of neurons, allowing you to move your fingers, remember a face, or imagine the future. Your lungs pull oxygen from the air and send it into your bloodstream, fueling the chemistry that keeps you alive. Now imagine that suddenly the central pump stops. The heart, which has been beating every second since before you were born, suddenly stops contracting. Blood no longer moves through the body. Oxygen is no longer delivered to the trillions of cells that depend on it. At that moment, something interesting happens. The body does not instantly shut down like a computer when the power cord is pulled. Instead, a series of processes begin unfolding step by step. Death, from a biological perspective, is not a single moment. It is a gradual cascade of physical and chemical changes. Without blood circulation, oxygen stops reaching the cells. Oxygen is essential because it allows cells to produce energy efficiently. Inside every cell are tiny structures called mitochondria. You can think of them as microscopic power plants. Their job is to convert oxygen and nutrients into a molecule called ATP. ATP is the energy currency of life. Every movement you make, every thought you think, every signal that travels through your nerves requires ATP. When oxygen disappears, ATP production begins to fail. Cells switch to emergency chemical pathways that produce very little energy and create acidic waste products. For a short time, these emergency systems keep cells functioning, but they cannot sustain life for long. The brain is particularly vulnerable to this problem. Brain cells require a huge amount of energy to maintain their electrical signals. Neurons constantly pump ions across their membranes to keep electrical gradients stable. Without ATP, those gradients collapse. Electrical signaling fails, and communication between neurons stops. Within about 5 minutes, without oxygen, many brain cells begin to suffer irreversible damage. But even here, the story is more complicated than we often imagine. The body does not die all at once. Different tissues shut down at different speeds. Some cells are extremely sensitive to oxygen loss, while others are surprisingly resilient. Skin cells can remain alive for many hours. Certain bone cells may survive even longer. Hair and nails do not actually grow after death, but the skin around them can shrink as it dries, creating the illusion of growth. The body is slowly transitioning from a highly organized system maintained by constant energy flow into a structure governed only by passive physical and chemical processes. In a way, it is like watching a vast city during a sudden power outage. Traffic lights stop working. Elevators freeze in place. Communication systems fail. Yet the buildings are still standing, the roads still exist, and some activity continues briefly before everything gradually falls silent. The moment the heart stops is not the end of the story. It is simply the beginning of a long and fascinating transformation governed entirely by the laws of physics, chemistry, and biology. Within the first hour after death, another quiet transformation begins. The body slowly starts to cool. While a person is alive, their body carefully maintains a temperature of around 37 degrees Celsius. This stability is not accidental. It is the result of millions of small adjustments happening constantly inside the body. Your metabolism generates heat as a natural byproduct of chemical reactions. Blood carries that heat through arteries and veins, distributing it evenly across organs, muscles, and skin. Even small temperature changes trigger responses. If your body becomes too warm, you sweat to release heat. If it becomes too cold, muscles may begin to shiver to generate warmth. All of this temperature control depends on a continuous supply of energy and circulation. When the heart stops beating, the entire system responsible for regulating temperature stops working as well. The body is no longer actively producing heat, and it is no longer distributing that heat efficiently. From that moment forward, the body simply follows one of the most basic principles of physics. Heat moves from warmer objects to cooler ones. You can see this principle in everyday life. Imagine pouring a cup of hot tea and leaving it on a table. At first, the tea is much warmer than the surrounding air. Gradually, heat flows out of the tea and into the environment. The temperature of the liquid slowly drops until it matches the temperature of the room. The human body behaves in exactly the same way after death. This cooling process is known as rigor mortis. It is not perfectly predictable, because many environmental factors influence how quickly heat leaves the body. The temperature of the room or outdoor environment matters a great deal. A body in a cold environment will lose heat much faster than one in a warm space. Clothing can act as insulation, slowing the loss of heat. Body fat also slows cooling because fat acts as a natural insulator. Wind, humidity, and the surface the body is resting on can all change how quickly temperature drops. Under typical conditions, the body may lose roughly 1 to 1.5 degrees Celsius per hour during the early stages. Over many hours, the temperature continues to fall until the body reaches equilibrium with the surrounding environment. At that point, the body is no longer warmer than the world around it. From the perspective of physics, this is simply thermodynamics in action. Living organisms constantly resist this natural tendency toward equilibrium. Every second of life requires energy to maintain internal order. Cells actively pump ions across membranes. Chemical reactions repair damage and build new molecules. The body spends enormous effort keeping itself organized and stable despite the constant pull of entropy. Death marks the moment when that resistance stops. Without energy flowing through the system, the body no longer fights against the environment. Heat escapes, chemical balances begin to shift. The carefully maintained internal conditions that supported life slowly fade away. Yet even during this cooling process, the body is not completely inactive. Many cells are still temporarily alive. Chemical reactions continue for a time, though they become slower as the temperature drops. The body is transitioning from a dynamic system filled with active processes into something much more passive. Instead of controlling its own conditions, it begins responding entirely to the surrounding physical world. What makes this stage fascinating is how ordinary the physics behind it really is. The same laws that cool a cup of tea or warm a stone in sunlight are quietly guiding the human body toward thermal balance. There are no special exceptions. The body simply becomes another physical object interacting with its environment according to the same rules that govern everything else in the universe. Several hours after death, another noticeable change begins to appear in the body. Muscles that were once flexible and capable of smooth movement gradually become stiff and rigid. Arms may resist bending. The jaw can become difficult to open, and joints begin to feel locked in place. This process is known as rigor mortis, and while it may seem mysterious at first glance, it is actually the result of a very specific and understandable chemical process inside muscle cells. To understand why muscles stiffen after death, it helps to think about how muscles function during life. Every movement your body makes, lifting a cup, blinking your eyes, taking a step, depends on millions of microscopic structures inside muscle fibers. These structures are made of proteins called actin and myosin. You can imagine them as tiny molecular machines that slide past one another in a coordinated way. When they slide together, the muscle contracts. When they separate, the muscle relaxes. But this sliding motion does not happen automatically. It requires energy. And that energy comes from a molecule called ATP. ATP acts like a small rechargeable battery inside cells. Each time a muscle contracts, ATP provides the energy needed for the actin and myosin proteins to detach and reset so they can move again. Without ATP, the system cannot reset. After death, the production of ATP stops because oxygen is no longer being delivered to the cells. The mitochondria, the tiny power plants inside cells, can no longer generate energy efficiently. As ATP levels drop, the molecular machinery responsible for muscle contraction begins to malfunction. At first, the muscles may still appear relaxed, but as the remaining ATP is used up, the actin and myosin proteins become locked together. Since there is no energy available to separate them, the muscle fibers remain stuck in their contracted state. This creates the stiffness characteristic of rigor mortis. The process usually begins in the smaller muscles of the body. The jaw and muscles of the face are often affected first, which is why the mouth may become difficult to move a few hours after death. Gradually, the stiffness spreads downward through the neck, shoulders, arms, torso, and finally the legs. Over the course of roughly 12 hours, most of the body's muscles may become rigid. Environmental conditions can influence how quickly rigor mortis develops. Warmer temperatures tend to speed up chemical reactions, which means the process can begin sooner and progress more rapidly in warm environments. In colder conditions, chemical reactions slow down and rigor mortis may develop more gradually. Interestingly, the stiffness does not last forever. After roughly 24 to 48 hours, the rigid muscles begin to relax again. This happens because the proteins that once formed the muscle structure start to break down as decomposition begins. Enzymes and bacteria gradually dismantle the molecular framework that held the muscle fibers together. What makes rigor mortis particularly fascinating is that it shows how life depends on constant energy flow at even the smallest scales. When the body is alive, muscles move smoothly because energy continuously powers the molecular machinery inside them. When that energy disappears, the machinery stops in place like a machine freezing mid-motion when its power source is removed. In this way, rigor mortis is not simply a sign of death. It is a reminder that every movement we make during life is powered by billions of tiny molecular interactions that depend on a constant supply of energy. Without that flow of energy, the intricate system that once allowed muscles to move freely becomes still, locked in the final position where chemistry left it. While muscles are becoming stiff and the body continues to cool, another quieter process begins deep inside the cells. This process is known as autolysis, which literally means self-digestion. It may sound dramatic, but is actually a natural consequence of how cells are built and how they maintain themselves during life. Every cell in the body is filled with specialized structures that perform different tasks. Some structures produce energy, some manufacture proteins, and others manage waste or recycle damaged components. Among these structures are tiny compartments called lysosomes. Lysosomes contain powerful digestive enzymes, molecules designed to break down proteins, fats, and other complex substances into smaller pieces that the cell can reuse. While the cell is alive, these enzymes are kept carefully contained inside the lysosome. The membranes of the lysosome act like protective walls, preventing the enzymes from damaging the rest of the cell. The cell tightly regulates when and where these enzymes are used. In many ways, lysosomes function like microscopic recycling centers, breaking down old cellular parts so that the materials can be reused. However, maintaining this level of control requires energy. The cell constantly spends ATP to keep its internal structures stable, maintain chemical gradients, and repair damage to membranes. When death occurs and ATP production stops, the systems that maintain cellular organization begin to fail. Cell membranes gradually lose their integrity. Chemical balances shift. The barriers that once kept different compartments separated begin to weaken. Over time, the membranes surrounding lysosomes become fragile and may rupture. When this happens, the digestive enzymes inside them spill out into the rest of the cell. At that point, the cell begins to break down its own components. Proteins that once held structures together are cut apart. Cellular membranes dissolve. Organelles that once performed vital functions are dismantled piece by piece. It is as if the recycling machinery inside the cell has been released without any control. Autolysis tends to occur more quickly in organs that contain large amounts of enzymes. The pancreas, for example, is rich in digestive enzymes because it normally helps break down food during digestion. After death, those same enzymes begin to act on the pancreatic tissue itself. The stomach and liver also contain many enzymes and can show signs of self-digestion relatively early in the process. What makes this stage particularly interesting from a scientific perspective is that the body is essentially being dismantled by the same biochemical tools it used during life. The enzymes responsible for autolysis were not created for destruction. Their normal role is maintenance, repair, and recycling. But without energy to regulate them, the system loses control, and the chemistry begins to move in a new direction. Even during this breakdown, physical and chemical laws are quietly guiding every step. Molecules interact according to their structures, Enzymes catalyze reactions based on their shapes, and diffusion allows substances to spread through tissues. There is no central control directing the process anymore. Instead, the body becomes a complex chemical environment where reactions unfold naturally. Autolysis marks a transition. The body that once maintained itself with incredible precision is slowly losing its internal organization. Cells that once worked together as part of a coordinated system begin to dissolve into their molecular components. It is the beginning of a much larger transformation, one that will soon involve not just the body's own chemistry, but also the living microorganisms that share the human ecosystem. As the hours pass and the body's own cells begin to break down, another community of life starts to play a major role in the transformation. These are the microorganisms that lived inside the body during life. While we often think of ourselves as a single organism, the human body actually contains trillions of bacteria and other microbes. Many of them live in the digestive system, especially in the large intestine, where they help break down food and produce useful molecules. During life, this microscopic ecosystem exists in a delicate balance. The immune system constantly monitors microbial populations, keeping potentially harmful bacteria under control. Oxygen levels, body temperature, and chemical conditions are carefully regulated, creating an environment where both human cells and microbes can coexist without causing damage. After death, that balance disappears. The immune system stops functioning because it depends on living cells, circulating blood, and active metabolism. Without immune defenses, the bacterial populations inside the body suddenly encounter an environment with no resistance. At the same time, tissues that were once protected begin to weaken because cells are breaking down through autolysis. Proteins and other molecules that were locked inside cells become available as nutrients. For bacteria, this represents a massive new supply of energy and material. The digestive tract becomes the starting point for this expansion. The intestines already contain enormous numbers of microbes, and many of them are specialized at breaking down complex biological molecules. As tissues around the intestines weaken, bacteria begin spreading into nearby organs and tissues. These microorganisms feed on proteins, carbohydrates, and lipids within the body. Through their metabolic processes, they break these complex molecules into simpler substances. In doing so, they produce various gases as byproducts. Some of the most common gases include methane, carbon dioxide, hydrogen, and hydrogen sulfide. Hydrogen sulfide is particularly noticeable because it has a strong smell often associated with decomposition. As these gases accumulate, they can begin to collect inside body cavities and tissues. This buildup can cause swelling and changes in the body's shape. The process is not sudden or explosive, but rather a gradual increase as microbial activity continues. Temperature plays a significant role in how quickly these processes occur. In warm environments, bacterial metabolism speeds up because chemical reactions happen faster at higher temperatures. In colder environments, microbial activity slows down and decomposition progresses more slowly. Moisture also affects the process because many microbes require water to carry out their chemical reactions. Another important factor is oxygen. Shortly after death, oxygen levels inside the body drop dramatically because circulation has stopped. Many bacteria in the intestines are adapted to low oxygen or completely oxygen-free conditions. These microbes thrive in the new environment and begin dominating the decomposition process. From a biological perspective, this stage represents a shift in control. While the body was alive, its cells coordinated activity through complex systems of signaling and regulation. After death, those control systems vanish. Microorganisms that were once only part of a balanced ecosystem become the primary drivers of change. Yet this transformation is not unusual in the natural world. In ecosystems everywhere, microorganisms play the role of recyclers. They break down organic matter and return nutrients to the environment, making those nutrients available for other forms of life. The same process that happens in forests when fallen leaves decay or when animals decompose is now occurring within the human body. What once functioned as a highly organized biological system gradually becomes part of a broader ecological cycle. Molecules that form tissues and organs are slowly converted into simpler substances, continuing their journey through the natural systems of Earth. By the second and third day after death, the transformations inside the body reveal a deeper principle of nature. Life exists as a temporary state of organized matter. Every system in the body, from the circulatory network to the neurons in the brain, from the structural proteins in muscles to the enzymes in cells, relies on a continuous flow of energy to maintain order. While alive, the human body functions far from equilibrium. It constantly expends energy to repair damage, transport molecules, regulate temperature, and maintain chemical balances. The countless reactions occurring in every cell resist the natural tendency of matter to disperse and break down. In physics, this tendency is called entropy. Life is essentially a battle against entropy, a temporary reversal of the universal drift toward disorder. When death occurs, the energy supply that sustains this battle ceases. Blood circulation stops, oxygen no longer reaches cells, and ATP, the molecule that powers nearly all cellular processes, disappears. As a result, the tightly regulated systems that maintained organization gradually fail. Muscles stiffen without energy to release actin and myosin interactions, cells digest themselves through autolysis, and microorganisms expand unchecked. The body, which had been an intricate machine resisting decay, begins returning to the simpler, more stable state dictated by natural law. It is no longer a controlled, living system, but a collection of chemical reactions and physical processes unfolding according to the basic principles that govern all matter. Even in this transition, the laws of chemistry and physics are precise and predictable. Molecules interact based on shape, charge, and energy states. Enzymes accelerate reactions where favorable gases diffuse from high concentrations to low, and solids break down into simpler components. The body becomes a microcosm of the universe at large, demonstrating the same rules that shape rivers, mountains, and stars. Decomposition, therefore, is not a violation of order, but a continuation of the physical patterns that created life in the first place. The structure of life collapses gradually because energy is no longer available to maintain it, allowing entropy to reassert itself in an observable and systematic way. This stage also emphasizes the interconnectedness between the body and the environment. The atoms that once formed tissues, blood, and organs do not vanish. Carbon, oxygen, nitrogen, and other elements persist and are eventually recycled into soil, air, water, and living organisms. Microbes speed up this process, breaking down complex structures into forms that can nourish plants or enter other ecosystems. Matter is neither created nor destroyed. It simply changes form, moving through cycles that have persisted for billions of years. From a cosmological perspective, the human body is a temporary arrangement of universal building blocks, held together by energy flow and chemical interactions, returning to the broader cycles of nature upon death. Observing the body in this stage offers a profound insight into the nature of life. Life is not a static property, but a dynamic pattern maintained by energy and matter in motion. Death is not an abrupt cessation, but a gradual unraveling of that pattern, a reversion to the baseline dictated by universal laws. Every process that follows the cooling, stiffening, self-digestion, and microbial takeover is governed by the same scientific principles that created life and maintain the structure of the cosmos. Decomposition is therefore not just an end, it is a continuation of matter and energy participating in the ongoing transformation of the universe. It highlights that the rules of physics and chemistry apply without exception, whether a system is living, dying, or long after it has returned to equilibrium. As decomposition progresses, one of the most striking realizations emerges. The atoms that once made up your body do not disappear. Every carbon atom in your muscles, every oxygen atom in your lungs, every calcium atom in your bones continues to exist long after the structures they formed have broken down. These atoms are ancient, older than human civilization itself. Many were forged in the cores of stars billions of years ago. When those stars exploded as supernova, they scattered these elements across space. Over time, these atoms became part of planets, oceans, plants, animals, and eventually humans. The matter that forms your body has existed in countless forms for billions of years, traveling through the universe, recombining, and taking new shapes. During life, these atoms are temporarily organized into a complex system capable of thought, sensation, and movement. They are arranged in cells, tissues, and organs forming intricate networks that enable consciousness. The human body is, in effect, a highly ordered pattern of matter temporarily resisting the natural drift toward chaos. This order is maintained by energy flow, food, oxygen, and sunlight are transformed into chemical energy that fuels every reaction, every signal, every heartbeat. Without this continuous energy input, the atoms themselves are indifferent. They have no memory of the structures they once formed. They simply follow the laws of physics and chemistry. After death, as energy input ceases, the highly organized systems gradually collapse. Cells digest themselves, muscles stiffen and then relax, and microorganisms accelerate the breakdown of tissues. The pattern that once defined you begins to dissolve, and the atoms are released into the environment. Some enter the soil and become part of plants. Others enter the air as gases or particulate matter. Some may be consumed by other living organisms, continuing the endless cycle of matter and energy. In this way, death is not annihilation, but transformation. Matter continues its journey, changing forms while obeying the same universal laws. The cosmic perspective of this process is profound. Life represents a temporary organization of matter capable of reflecting on its own existence. Consciousness arises not from unique matter, but from a particular arrangement of ordinary atoms interacting under specific conditions. The atoms themselves are indifferent, yet when organized in this specific way, they produce a mind capable of wonder, curiosity, and self-reflection. For a brief moment, the universe becomes aware of itself through the patterns formed by these atoms. The body's decomposition is simply the release of those atoms back into the broader flow of matter, where they may eventually participate in new patterns, potentially forming another living system that will again contemplate its existence. This perspective reframes the concept of death in a scientific and philosophical way. Instead of imagining a sudden end, we see a gradual transformation. The body is not destroyed but redistributed. The atoms remain, the energy laws remain, and the processes that created life continue. Death is part of a continuous cycle of creation, organization, decay, and recombination. The universe does not erase the existence of matter. It merely rearranges it according to the unchanging principles of physics and chemistry. Viewing death in this way changes how we understand our place in the universe. Our bodies are temporary arrangements of ancient atoms, briefly organized into conscious systems that can perceive and question their own existence. When the structure collapses, the matter continues its journey, participating in the ongoing processes of the cosmos. In a real sense, the universe has been conscious of itself through every living being, including you. Decomposition is not a negation of life, but a continuation of matter and energy in eternal transformation. A reminder that life and death are part of the same universal process. Understanding death from this perspective leads to a profound realization about the nature of identity and consciousness. We tend to think of ourselves as fixed, stable entities, individuals with permanent bodies and minds. Yet physics and biology reveal a very different truth. Even while alive, the human body is in constant flux. Atoms enter and leave the body continuously. Cells die and are replaced. Molecules are broken down and rebuilt in countless chemical reactions every second. You are not a fixed object. You are a dynamic pattern, a temporary arrangement of matter and energy maintained by the continuous flow of energy through your systems. Life itself is a process, not a static state. Death does not suddenly erase this process. It simply halts the energy flow that maintains it. The heart stops pumping, oxygen ceases to reach cells, and ATP production collapses. Muscles stiffen through rigor mortis. Cells digest themselves through autolysis, and microorganisms multiply to decompose tissues further. The body transitions from an organized, living system into a chemical and physical system governed purely by universal laws. Entropy, the tendency toward disorder, reasserts itself, and the highly ordered arrangement that once defined a living body gradually dissolves. Yet, even in this unraveling, the atoms themselves persist. unaffected by our sense of finality. Carbon, oxygen, nitrogen, hydrogen, and other elements continue to exist, eventually becoming part of soil, air, water, or other organisms. Matter is never destroyed. It simply changes form, returning to the cycles that sustain the universe. This realization invites a reconsideration of what it means to exist. Consciousness and self-awareness arise not from unique atoms, but from their specific arrangements in space and time. For a brief period, the atoms in your body were configured into a system capable of thought, perception, and curiosity. The universe, through this organization, became aware of itself. When death occurs, that arrangement dissolves, yet the atoms continue to flow through the environment, maintaining their participation in the larger cycles of matter and energy. In this sense, life and death are not opposites, but two stages of a continuous transformation, one of organization followed by dissolution, each governed by the same immutable physical laws. Viewing death through this lens emphasizes the transient, yet remarkable, nature of consciousness. Life is an intricate dance of atoms and energy temporarily arranged into patterns capable of reflection and understanding. Death is the graceful unwinding of these patterns, returning matter to its broader context while obeying the fundamental laws that have shaped the universe for billions of years. It is a reminder that the processes governing the collapse of the body are the same as those that built it. Chemistry and physics do not discriminate between life and non-life, they merely operate according to universal rules. This perspective also offers a sense of continuity. The atoms that once formed you may eventually become part of plants, animals, or other humans. In this way, your matter persists, participating in new forms of life and organization. While the conscious experience that once defined you ceases, the underlying building blocks continue, connected to the cycles that have existed since the formation of stars. Death is not annihilation. It is transformation, an inevitable return to the physical processes from which life temporarily emerged. The body dissolves, energy disperses, and the universe continues its eternal flow, reorganizing matter in new and unpredictable ways. By contemplating death scientifically, we confront not only the impermanence of our individual patterns, but also the remarkable fact that for a brief window in cosmic history, the universe became aware of itself through us. The temporary arrangement of atoms that allowed consciousness to exist is itself extraordinary. Understanding this encourages a shift in perspective. Life is not a permanent possession, but a fleeting, dynamic pattern of matter and energy. Death is not an end, but a continuation, a transformation, and a participation in the ongoing evolution of the cosmos. In this sense, the universe is never truly unaware. It becomes conscious through life, dissolves, and waits for new patterns to emerge, repeating the cycle endlessly.